Welcome to the debate. So imagine paying a financial advisor to invest $400, only to ask for the itemized receipt and discover they put exactly $15 into your actual portfolio.
Wow. Yeah, that would be terrible.
Right? And the rest of it was completely eaten up by administrative fees or, waiting in the lobby, buying lunch for the building, and compensating for the poor behavior of other clients. You would fire that advisor before they could even finish explaining.
Absolutely. You'd be out the door.
Exactly. Well, today we are applying that exact same itemized scrutiny to a child's 7-hour school day. I will be arguing that the traditional classroom model is, well, it's crippled by systemic logistical bloat, and that a dense 90-minute one-on-one instructional model is vastly superior for actual learning.
And I look at that exact same breakdown and see a highly reductive mathematical equation. I'll be arguing that while one-on-one instruction is an undeniably powerful tool, framing the traditional 7-hour day as practically devoid of learning, well, it requires us to aggressively write off group instruction and independent practice, both of which are frankly structurally vital to how human beings actually acquire and consolidate complex knowledge.
This is really the core tension we are unpacking today, drawn directly from the analysis in the piece, The 90-Minute Reality, Why Focused Learning Beats the Clock. We are looking at the fundamental architecture of the learning day.
Right, the actual minutes.
Exactly. If we break down the typical 420-minute school day, 7 hours, the sheer inefficiency is staggering. I mean, we're talking about 15 minutes for a commute, 20 minutes just for arrival and attendance, 40 minutes lost to transitions between subjects.
Which really adds up.
It really does. And then 65 minutes given over to lunch and recess, 40 minutes literally just waiting or lining up, and another 35 minutes devoted entirely to behavior management.
Yeah.
When you strip away all those logistical hurdles, you realize you don't actually need 7 hours to educate a child. A 90-minute model, broken into focused blocks, say 20 minutes for math, 10 for spelling, it replaces the chaos of crowd control with 100% one-on-one focus. It basically redefines education by active, individualized learning rather than mere physical attendance in a brick-and-mortar building.
Well, the problem with that breakdown is what it strategically categorizes as non-learning time. Yes, we can all agree that lining up for the cafeteria isn't exactly an academic pursuit.
Right.
But to arrive at the conclusion that a child only receives a handful of genuinely educational minutes in a public school, we have to look at how this math handles actual classroom instruction. The analysis literally accounts for 105 minutes of group lecture and 50 minutes of independent worksheet practice.
Which it dismisses, yes.
Right. It effectively zeroes out this time. The premise is that because a teacher is broadcasting to 30 kids at the same time, it isn't customized, and therefore it's essentially wasted time. Compressing 105 minutes of lecture and 50 minutes of practice into a hyper-condensed 20-minute subject block assumes that complex subjects can be instantly absorbed just because the ratio is 1-to-1. I mean, it completely ignores the cognitive necessity of slow processing.
Look, I'm not convinced by the idea that we are aggressively writing off that time because the delivery mechanism of the broadcast itself is inherently flawed. Let's look at those 105 minutes of group lecture you just defended.
Okay, let's look at them.
If a teacher is broadcasting a lesson on fractions to, say, 25 or 30 kids, they have to pace that lesson for the mathematical average of the room. Think of it like an eye exam.
An eye exam?
Yeah, an eye exam. If an optometrist puts the exact same pair of generic average prescription lenses on 30 people at once, maybe 3 or 4 people are going to see perfectly clearly. The rest are going to be squinting, and a few will be entirely blurred out.
I see where you're going with this.
Right. So in that classroom, the fast learners are sitting there completely bored because they grasped the denominator concept in 2 minutes. And the confused kids are staying quiet because they don't want to look foolish in front of their peers. When pacing is built for the average, that broadcast teaching inherently dilutes the learning to the point of massive inefficiency.
I understand the appeal of the optometrist analogy. I really do. But I don't buy it because an eye exam is a passive reception of visual stimuli. Education is not passive.
It shouldn't be anyway.
Exactly. It is an active, collective, cognitive process. Let me push back hard on this idea that pacing for a group is a flaw that must be eradicated. Listening to a teacher explain the mechanics of fractions or, the causes of a historical event for 105 minutes is education. Yes, it is broadcast. But how do students actually learn?
Well, by doing.
Right, but they don't just act as empty vessels waiting for a one-on-one data transfer. They learn by observing the teacher's thought process. They learn by hearing the questions their peers ask, questions they might not have thought to articulate themselves. They learn by identifying where their own understanding aligns or diverges from the group.
Okay, but at what cost?
Well, claiming the 90-minute model offers 6 times more attention by erasing group lecture ignores how humans have historically and biologically absorbed complex cultural and academic information. I mean, we are social learners.
I see why you value that social friction. But let's look at what that social learning actually costs in real time. You mentioned hearing peers ask questions. We have to account for that mathematically.
Go on.
In a typical day, 35 minutes is spent re-explaining concepts to kids who didn't get it the first time. So your child understood the lesson the first 2 minutes, but they're forced to sit and wait while the teacher reviews it for 8 other kids who were looking out the window or just didn't grasp it.
Which happens, yes.
That isn't a beautiful collective cognitive process. That is a systemic bottleneck. It literally holds an individual learner back.
But re-explanation is a form of reinforcement. Hearing a concept articulated a second or third time, perhaps in slightly different ways, to address different students' confusion, it deepens the neural pathways for the child who got it in the first 2 minutes.
You think so?
Absolutely. It shifts their understanding from rote memorization to deeper mastery.
Well, the data simply doesn't support the idea that this environment is optimized for mastery. Let's look at the systemic bloat beyond just re-explaining. According to the OECD TALIS 2024 survey of over 280,000 teachers, 13 to 16% of class time is spent purely on keeping order.
Wow, 16%?
Yes, and in some schools it's over 20%. We are talking about 35 minutes and more every single day dedicated just to getting kids to stop talking, sit down, and redirecting behavior.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Right? There is a telling anecdote about a 9-year-old child who had never been in the public system, who visited a school building for an evaluation. His immediate observation was, what do they do with the rest of the time? I mean, even a child can see the friction. We cannot defend an educational architecture where so much literal time and cognitive energy is burned simply managing the physical existence of a crowd.
Okay, I will grant you the behavioral management time. No one is going to sit here and enthusiastically defend 35 minutes of telling kids to be quiet.
Glad we agree on that.
Yeah, that is undeniably a logistical friction point of the group model. But where I draw a hard line is how we categorize the 50 minutes of what is often dismissed as busy work. The argument for the 90-minute reality claims that worksheets only exist to keep 30 kids quiet while the teacher works with a small group.
Because they generally do.
No, it claims they exist because of the classroom, not because of the learning. That is a vast mischaracterization of pedagogy. Worksheets and quiet desk time represent independent practice. Think of independent practice like lifting weights.
Okay, the gym analogy.
Right, the gym analogy. The teacher demonstrating the deadlift during the lecture is incredibly helpful, but the muscle isn't actually built until the student picks up the heavy bar and struggles with gravity themselves. That 15 minutes of worksheet time is the gym.
I see.
It is the critical phase where the cognitive load transfers from the teacher's broadcast to the student's own internal processing. Does a hyper-efficient 20-minute one-on-one math block completely negate the need for a student to sit quietly, stare at a problem, struggle with it, and solve it on their own?
Yes, it absolutely can. And the mechanism for that is immediate error correction. Let me explain exactly why that gym time you're defending can actually be neurologically detrimental in a traditional classroom.
Detrimental? How?
In a normal school day, a child does that 50 minutes of independent practice on a Monday. They are at their desk, lifting the weights, as you say. But what if their form is wrong? What if they misunderstand the core formula for long division?
Well, the teacher corrects it.
Eventually, yes. But they sit there and practice the completely wrong method 50 times in a row. They are literally burning incorrect neural pathways into their brain. They don't find out they made a mistake until Thursday when the graded paper comes back.
That's a fair point.
Teaching the right way, they have to spend twice the energy helping the child unlearn the crystallized mistake. In the 90-minute one-on-one model, you see the mistake in 3 seconds.
Right.
You catch it, you correct the form immediately, and you move on. The research consistently shows that immediate feedback is one of the most powerful tools in learning. You don't need 50 minutes of independent practice if you completely eliminate the compounding practice of errors.
That assumes the primary value of independent practice is just arriving at the correct answer as fast as possible.
Well, isn't it?
No, not entirely. The struggle itself, the productive struggle of hitting a wall, trying a different method, and realizing your own error, it builds resilience. But let's follow your logic and stress test this 90-minute blueprint.
Go for it.
We are talking about a very specific, strict breakdown. A 20-minute math block, 20 minutes of reading and language, 20 minutes of writing, 10 minutes of spelling and vocabulary, and 20 minutes of exploration. I look at that schedule and I see a system that is just as artificially rigid as the 7-hour bell schedule it critiques.
I'm not sure how you arrive at that conclusion. I mean, the entire premise of this model is that it's built on your own schedule, totally free of the factory bell system.
Because human cognition doesn't neatly adhere to 20-minute increments. We have to talk about cognitive load theory here. Working memory is a biological bottleneck.
Sure.
It can only hold about 4 to 7 pieces of novel information at any given time. When a child is learning long division, they're holding the divisor, the dividend, the multiplication steps, and the subtraction steps in their head all at once. It is exhausting.
It is, which is why 20 minutes is plenty.
But a 7-hour school day, for all its logistical bloat, provides natural cognitive breathing room. The transitions, the walk to the cafeteria, even the moments of just zoning out during a group lecture, those are biological defragging periods for the brain.
Defragging periods?
Exactly. They allow the working memory to transfer that novel information into long-term schemas. If you subject a child to 90 minutes of sheer, unblinking, high-density one-on-one instruction, you aren't just providing immediate feedback, you are conducting an interrogation.
Wow, an interrogation. That's an interesting point about cognitive fatigue. Though I would frame the reality of the tutoring model quite differently.
How so?
The 90-minute framework isn't meant to be a rigid stopwatch. It's a representation of instructional density.
You are assuming the adult is just hammering the child with new information for 90 minutes straight.
Well, that's what the schedule implies.
But the parent or tutor is intimately aware of the child's cognitive state, precisely because it is one-on-one. If the child's working memory is fatigued, you pivot. If they are stuck on a complex fractions concept, you slow down.
But if you slow down, the math of the 90-minute day falls apart. What happens when it takes 45 minutes to work through that cognitive block on fractions?
You take the 45 minutes. Does the parent strictly adhere to the 20-minute math block and cut them off? If you actually let the child wrestle with the material until they achieve mastery, that 90-minute day is going to expand very quickly. The blueprint presents 90 minutes as a neat, tidy reality, but true, messy, individualized learning rarely fits into a perfectly optimized spreadsheet.
It fits perfectly when you look at the empirical data on tutoring. We aren't just theorizing here.
Right, the research.
Exactly. We are leaning on decades of rigorous education research scholars like Benjamin Bloom, Kurt Van Len, and Andre Nicow. Bloom's famous 2 sigma problem research demonstrated that students who receive one-on-one tutoring perform, on average, 2 standard deviations above students in a traditional classroom setting.
2 standard deviations is massive.
It's unbelievable. 2 standard deviations means the tutored student is outperforming 98% of the students in the traditional class. And more recent meta-analysis like Matthew Kraft's 2020 data continue to show tutoring has one of the largest effect sizes ever measured in educational research.
I don't dispute that.
The reason it only takes 20 minutes a subject is precisely because the density of instruction is so high. There is no hiding in the back of the room, no daydreaming while someone else answers the question, no waiting for the rest of the class to catch up. It is a continuous, perfectly calibrated feedback loop.
Calibrated, sure.
That density allows you to cover what a classroom covers in a fraction of the time.
Look, I don't dispute Bloom's 2 sigma problem, nor do I dispute the efficacy of tutoring. The data is clear that one-on-one attention drives tremendous academic gains. What I dispute is the leap from tutoring is highly effective to the rest of the 7-hour day is entirely systemic bloat.
But so much of it is.
By creating this hyperdense environment, you are requiring the parent or tutor to be an incredibly efficient conduit of information. It relies heavily on the assumption that every parent has the pedagogical skill to instantly diagnose an error in 3 seconds, understand the underlying misconception, and correct it without causing frustration.
That's a fair concern.
A teacher with 30 kids might be broadcasting, but they are also a trained professional who knows how to sequence a curriculum over 9 months. They know how to scaffold a concept so that the struggle during independent practice is actually productive.
But that trained professional is trapped in a system that forces them to spend 20% of their day just telling kids to sit down. Think of the alternative reality this model presents.
Okay.
A child does 20 minutes of math before the parent logs in to work. They read a book after lunch. They do 20 minutes of writing in the afternoon, and they are entirely finished, having received world-class, individualized instruction by the time the neighborhood school bus is just dropping kids off.
It sounds idyllic.
It really does. There are no screaming matches over homework at 8 o'clock at night because the cognitive work is already done. The time was never the actual problem. The systemic architecture was the problem. Less time literally equals less cost, both financially and emotionally.
It is a beautiful picture, but it assumes that education is merely the efficient transmission of data from an adult's brain into a child's brain. A school building is an ecosystem.
A very messy one.
Yes, it is messy. Yes, waiting in line for 40 minutes a day is frustrating, but navigating that ecosystem builds independence, stamina, and shared cultural understanding. It forces a child to learn how to exist in a community that isn't perfectly tailored to their exact cognitive pacing.
Right.
Making the math look great by claiming 6 times more focused attention in 1/5 of the time is an impressive rhetorical strategy, but it ignores the structural differences in how knowledge is acquired and utilized in a community versus in isolation.
So we are essentially looking at a fundamental trade-off here. From my perspective, when you break down the 420 minutes in the building, the illusion of the 7-hour school day completely falls apart.
If you look strictly at the minutes.
Right. It reveals that a vast majority of a child's day is padded with logistics, transportation, waiting, and behavioral management. By shifting to a high-density, error-correcting, one-on-one model, families can reclaim huge portions of their lives without sacrificing an ounce of educational progress. In fact, because we bypass the cognitive damage of practicing errors and harness customized pacing, the 90-minute model represents a profound upgrade in true educational efficiency.
And from where I sit, while the 90-minute 101 model is undeniably potent, the argument relies on aggressive accounting to make its point. Framing a 7-hour day as yielding only 15 minutes of actual learning requires us to entirely write off group instruction and independent practice as wasted time.
Which I still argue it largely is.
And I argue those elements aren't systemic waste. They are structurally different, slower burn methods of knowledge acquisition. They build the necessary cognitive stamina and social friction that a perfectly curated high-speed feedback loop simply cannot replicate.
Well, it seems we both completely agree that the empirical data supporting immediate feedback and individual tutoring is incredibly compelling. It certainly highlights genuine flaws and mathematically undeniable limitations in our traditional 1:25 classroom ratios.
Absolutely. The academic efficacy of tutoring is not in question here. Where we remain in deep disagreement is whether group dynamics, broadcast teaching, and independent struggle are inherently a failure of systemic bloat or simply a different, vital ecosystem for human development.
It ultimately forces us to ask what we are truly valuing when we send a child to a building for a full day. Think back to that financial advisor and the itemized receipt.
Right.
Breaking down accepted norms like the 7-hour school day into their literal minutes is a profound exercise in understanding what we prioritize with our time and our cognition. We encourage you to examine the 90-minute reality breakdown for yourself, look closely at where those minutes go, and draw your own conclusions about how educational time is best spent.